The padlock cost $11 at a hardware store outside Moundsville. I remember that because I stood in the checkout line turning it over in my hands, reading the packaging. Hardened steel, weather-resistant, bolt-cutter-proof, and thinking, good. I wanted something I couldn't talk myself out of. My name is Darren Lowu. I was 31 years old the night I drove to the West Virginia State Penitentiary, climbed through a collapsed section of the south perimeter wall, walked into cell block 4, and locked myself inside a 6x9 cell with a padlock I'd threaded through the bars from the inside. The key dropped deliberately into a drain in the corridor floor. I brought a sleeping bag, 4 bottles of water, 2 protein bars, a flashlight with 6 hours of battery, and a notebook I never opened. I didn't bring a phone. That was the point. What I was doing there isn't complicated. 7 weeks earlier, I'd fallen asleep at the wheel on Route 2 south of New Martinsville and crossed the center line into an oncoming Chevy Tahoe, driven by a woman named Patricia Sims. She died at the scene. Her 13-year-old daughter, Lily, survived with a fractured pelvis and a collapsed lung. I walked away with a bruised sternum and a cut above my left eye that needed 9 stitches. The police report said fatigue. The blood work said .00. No drugs, no alcohol, no mechanical failure. Just a man who was tired and chose to keep driving anyway. The criminal case was still pending. My lawyer said I'd likely face vehicular manslaughter, maybe 18 months, maybe probation. He said it like that was good news. So I came to the prison on my own. Not as a stunt, not as content, not as therapy someone prescribed. I came because I'd killed a woman, and the world was still letting me walk around in it. And I needed the world to stop doing that for at least one night. I needed walls. I needed a lock I couldn't undo. I needed to sit in a cell and feel it. The weight, the confinement, the hours moving slowly enough to teach me something about what I'd taken from Patricia Sims. I arrived at 11:40 at night. April 3rd. Clear sky. A 3/4 moon bright enough to throw shadows through the shattered windows of the East Wing. The prison had been decommissioned since 1995 and partially converted into a tourist attraction. Ghost tours, Halloween events. But the funding had dried up years ago, and most of the complex was fenced off and forgotten. The section I entered through hadn't been maintained in a decade. The wall breach was obvious, well documented on urban exploration forums. I wasn't the first person to go inside, but I was, as far as I could tell, the only person there that night. The smell hit first. Not rot, not sewage. Something mineral and cold, like watite pressed against your face. The floors were concrete with seams of standing water catching moonlight in long silver threads. I used the flashlight sparingly. Cell block 4 was on the second tier, accessed by a stairwell with a rusted railing that groaned when I touched it but held. I chose a cell near the middle of the row. Not the first, not the last. A cell with no graffiti, no beer cans, no sign that anyone had used it for anything in years. I unrolled the sleeping bag on the concrete slab that had been a bed, threaded the padlock through the bars, clicked it shut. Then I walked the key to the drain grate 6 feet away, knelt, and pushed it through the slot. I heard it hit something soft far below. Mud, standing water, whatever collected in the guts of a building this old. That's when I heard the breathing. Not mine, not wind, not pipes settling or animals nesting. Breathing, rhythmic, wet, and coming from directly below me. From the floor itself, or from whatever space existed between the floors. Slow inhalation, slow exhalation. A pace that suggested something large at rest. I held still. The breathing continued, patient, untroubled. I told myself, building acoustics, old pipes, air pressure differentials. I said those words in my head like someone reading a list. I didn't believe any of them, and I hadn't even been in the cell for 3 minutes. 11 hours and 47 minutes until the first emergency broadcast. I didn't know that then. What I knew was this. I was locked inside a cell I couldn't open, in a building no one knew I'd entered, and something underneath me was breathing. I sat on the sleeping bag with my back against the wall and my knees drawn up, and I listened. The breathing didn't change. Same rhythm, same depth, same wet undertone, like lungs working through a thin membrane of fluid. It wasn't loud, if there had been any ambient noise at all. Traffic, wind, a generator. I might not have noticed it. But the prison was silent the way deep water is silent. Total, pressurized. The kind of silence that makes your own heart beat an intrusion. I counted breaths for something to do. At 60, I stopped. The interval was roughly 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. Too slow for a human at rest, too regular for an animal. I told myself it was a resonance effect. Air moving through a subterranean passage, shaped by corridors and drains into something that mimicked biological rhythm. That was possible. The penitentiary had an extensive sub-basement level, originally used for solitary confinement, later condemned and sealed after flooding in the 70s. Air pressure systems in large sealed structures can produce sounds that fool the ear. I pressed my palm flat against the concrete floor. Cold, faintly damp, no vibration. At 12:30, the breathing stopped, not tapered, not trailed off. Stopped. Mid-inhale, as if whatever produced it had been switched off. The silence that replaced it was worse. The first silence had been ambient, structural, a feature of the building. This silence was sudden. It had a before and an after, and I was sitting in the after. I turned the flashlight on and swept the corridor outside my cell. Empty. The beam caught dust motes drifting through the bars, a collapsed ceiling tile 15 feet to my left, and the drain grate where I'd dropped the key. Nothing moved. Nothing reflected back. I turned the light off to conserve battery and sat in the dark. At 1:15, I was tracking time by counting seconds in clusters of 60, which is less accurate than you think, but better than nothing. I heard footsteps. Below me again. Not in the corridor. Underneath. They moved from my left to my right at a walking pace, unhurried. And then they stopped directly below my cell. Precisely below it. Then, 3 knocks from the underside of the floor, slow, deliberate, spaced like a question. I didn't answer. I didn't move. My flashlight was in my right hand, and my left hand was pressed flat against the sleeping bag, and I could feel the cold radiating upward through the fabric, through my palm, into my wrist. The cold had direction. It was coming from whatever was below me. The knocks didn't repeat. At 1:40, the breathing resumed. Same rhythm, same wet undertone, same patience. It continued without interruption for the next 2 hours. I sat awake through all of it. Not because I was afraid. I was, but fear wasn't what kept me alert. It was recognition. Something in the pattern of that breathing was familiar in a way I couldn't place. Like a melody, you know, but can't name. At 3:50, I finally slept. Not voluntarily. My body overrode my mind, the way it does when exhaustion hits a biological threshold that no amount of adrenaline can override. I slept sitting up, wedged into the corner where the wall met the slab, the flashlight still in my hand. I dreamed about the accident. Not the impact. I never dream about the impact. I dreamed about the 4 seconds before it, when I opened my eyes and saw headlights where headlights shouldn't be, and understood everything at once. The drift, the lane, the geometry of what was about to happen. In the dream, Those 4 seconds lasted much longer than 4 seconds. They lasted long enough for me to study Patricia Sims's face through the windshield, which I didn't actually see, which I couldn't have seen at that speed in that light. But in the dream, her face was clear. She looked calm, not resigned, not afraid. Calm the way the breathing was calm, patient. I woke at 5:20 to gray light filtering through the windows and the breathing gone. The prison was quiet. My back ached. My mouth was dry. I drank half a bottle of water in slow sips and looked at the padlock on the bars. 12 hours. That's what I'd planned. Lock myself in at midnight, wait until noon, then figure out the padlock problem. I'd brought a small hacksaw blade hidden in the sleeping bag stuff sack. 12 hours of confinement. A self-imposed sentence for a crime the courts hadn't yet punished. I had 6 hours and 40 minutes left. I almost reached for the hacksaw blade right then. Dawn in a decommissioned prison doesn't arrive. It accumulates. Light seeped through the shattered clear-story windows in gradual increments. First gray, then a dull yellow, then something close to actual morning. But the angles were wrong. The windows faced east, and the light entered through gaps that sent it ricocheting off walls and floors and ceilings in directions that made the space feel lit from the inside rather than from above. By 6:15, I could see the full corridor without the flashlight. I should describe the corridor because it matters later. Cell block 4 was a double-tier arrangement. 20 cells per side, 40 per floor, stacked 2 stories high with a catwalk running the upper level. My cell was on the upper tier, roughly center. The corridor below was visible through the catwalk grating. I could see the lower tier cell doors, most standing open, a few rusted shut. At the far end of the block, the corridor terminated at a steel security door that led to what the old facility maps called the Administrative Segregation Wing. Solitary. That door was closed. Beyond it, according to the urban exploration forums I'd read, the sub-basement access stairwell descended to the condemned lower level. That door was the thing I kept looking at. Not because it had changed. It hadn't. It was the same featureless gray steel it had probably been for 60 years. But in the growing light, I noticed something I hadn't seen in the dark. The floor in front of it was clean. Not just clear of debris. Clean, as in someone had swept or mopped a path roughly 2 feet wide leading from the base of that door down the center of the lower corridor, through the block, and out toward the main junction. Every other surface in the building was filthy dust, plaster fragments, pigeon droppings, water stains. But that path was bare concrete, polished almost, as if something heavy had been dragged along it repeatedly, or as if something passed over it so regularly that nothing had time to settle. I hadn't noticed it in the dark because I'd entered from the stairwell at the near end and gone straight up. I'd never walked the lower corridor. But from above, with morning light cutting across the floor at a low angle, the path was obvious. It ran straight. It was consistent. It was maintained. At 6:30, I ate one of the protein bars and drank more water and tried to do what I'd come to do. Sit with the confinement, feel the weight of it, let the hours teach me something. But the breathing had changed the arithmetic of the night. I hadn't come here to encounter something. I'd come to encounter myself, and now the building was offering a different syllabus entirely. I examined the padlock. Hardened steel. The hasp was threaded through the cell door's latch mechanism. The original locking mechanism was long gone, just an empty housing with a slot wide enough to accommodate the padlock's shackle. I'd positioned it so I could reach through the bars and grip it. But without the key, the only option was cutting. The hacksaw blade was a 6-inch replacement blade, no frame. I could use it by hand. It would take time. 30 minutes, maybe 40 depending on the alloy. I left it in the sleeping bag. I had until noon. Whatever was breathing below me had stopped. The path on the floor was strange, but static. I was here to sit with consequence. Everything else was the building being a building. That's what I told myself at 6:30 in the morning. By 7:15, I didn't believe it anymore, because that's when the sound came from behind the security door at the far end of the block. Not breathing this time, but a voice. Muffled. Human. A woman saying something I couldn't resolve into words, repeated at intervals of roughly 10 seconds. Not screaming, not pleading, speaking, conversationally, as if she were addressing someone who was right there with her and couldn't hear well. I stood up and pressed my face against the bars and listened. The voice said the same phrase 4 more times. On the 5th repetition, the acoustics shifted. She'd moved closer to the door, and I caught 2 words clearly. Still here. Then the security door at the far end of the corridor moved. Not opened. Moved. Shifted a 1/4 inch inward, as if pressure had been applied from the other side and released. The sound it made was a low metallic groan that traveled the full length of the block and settled into my chest. The door didn't open. The voice didn't speak again. 7:40. I was gripping the bars with both hands, standing, watching the security door at the far end of the lower corridor, when I heard the first siren. It was distant, miles away, maybe more. A single tone, rising and falling. The kind of civil defense siren you hear tested on the first Wednesday of every month in towns that still have them. I'd grown up in Wheeling, 30 minutes north. I knew the sound. But this wasn't a Wednesday. And the siren didn't cycle through its test pattern and stop. It held, one continuous wail, Dopplering faintly as wind shifted outside the prison walls. Then a second siren joined it. Different pitch, different direction. South, maybe southeast. Then a third. By 7:50, I could hear at least 5 distinct sirens from different vectors, all running simultaneously, none stopping. Through the clear-story windows, the sky was still clear. No smoke, no aircraft. Just that layered, atonal howling coming from every direction like the countryside itself was keening. I want to be precise about timing because it matters. The first verified emergency broadcast, the one that hit television and radio simultaneously, was logged at 11:07 a.m. Eastern on April 4th. The National Guard mobilization order for West Virginia was issued at 11:42 a.m. The Moundsville city limits were inside the initial quarantine perimeter by 1 p.m. But the siren started at my location before 8 in the morning. Someone knew hours before the broadcasts. Someone was already sounding alarms that the official timeline doesn't account for. I didn't know any of that then. What I knew was sirens, multiple, sustained. And I was locked inside a cell with no phone, no key, and a hacksaw blade that would take half an hour to cut through a padlock shackle. I pulled the blade from the sleeping bag and started cutting. If you've never used a hacksaw blade without a frame, by hand on hardened steel, I can describe it simply. It's cutting with a butter knife. The blade flexed with every stroke. My grip slipped. The steel shackle was less than a centimeter in diameter, but it was case-hardened, and the blade skated across the surface for the first 50 strokes without biting. I repositioned, found an angle where the teeth caught, and began making progress measured in fractions of a millimeter. By 8:15, the sirens outside hadn't stopped. New ones had joined. I could no longer count distinct sources. They'd merged into a single ambient roar, like living near a freeway. My right hand was cramping. A blister was forming on my index finger where the blade's edge rested. I'd cut maybe a third of the way through the shackle. That's when the security door opened. Not shifted, not creaked. Opened. Fully, smoothly, swinging inward on hinges that should have been rusted to immobility, but moved as if oiled yesterday. From my position on the upper tier, I could see straight down the lower corridor to the doorway. Beyond it, darkness. Complete. The morning light that filled the cell block stopped at that threshold, as if it had been told to. A woman stepped through. She was mid-50s, short gray hair, wearing a dark blue coverall, the kind maintenance workers wear, or electricians. Work boots, no flashlight. She walked with her hands at her sides, neither hurried nor careful, the way someone walks through their own kitchen in the morning. She stopped 10 feet past the doorway and looked up. Directly at me. "You're early," she said. Her voice was clear, conversational, exactly the tone I'd heard through the door. No echo, no strain, as if the prison's acoustics bent around her words and delivered them precisely. I stopped cutting. The hacksaw blade was slick with sweat and a thin paste of steel dust. I said nothing. "The sirens," she said. "You're hearing them. That means it moved up. We were supposed to have until tonight." She said "we" the way someone says it when they mean a group you're already part of, not one they're inviting you to join. "Who are you?" I said. "My name is Glynis Ward. I was the last corrections officer assigned to the segregation wing before decommission. I've been coming back since." She tilted her head, studying me. "You locked yourself in." It wasn't a question. She could see the padlock. She could see the hacksaw blade in my hand. She could see all of it. "I'm leaving," I said. "Through that lock, yes. You've got maybe 20 minutes of cutting left. The steel is softer past the case layer." She paused. "But I'd think carefully about where you go after. The sirens aren't a drill. Something's happening in Moundsville, and it's moving outward. And this building is the last place you want to leave today." I kept cutting. Glynis Ward didn't try to stop me. She walked the lower corridor with the same unhurried gait, checking cell doors, testing latches, looking inside, moving on. From above, she looked like a guard doing morning rounds 30 years after the last prisoner shipped out. There was something in the precision of it, the muscle memory efficiency of each stop, that made me believe at least part of what she'd said. She had worked here. Her body remembered the route. "How did you get in?" I asked between strokes. My breathing was heavy. The blade was biting deeper now. She'd been right about the softer inner steel. "Same way you did. South wall breach. I come every few weeks. Have for years." "Why?" She stopped below me and looked up again. In the morning light, her face was lined and weathered, but her eyes were precise. "Because something lives in the sub-basement, and someone has to make sure it stays there." I almost laughed. It sounded like a ghost tour pitch. The haunted prison, the restless spirit, the lone guardian. But she'd said lives, present tense, and the breathing I'd heard all night pressed against the back of my memory with the weight of corroboration. "I heard it," I said. "Breathing, under the floor. You heard it because it wanted you to hear it. It's been down there since before the prison closed. Maybe since before the prison was built. I don't know what it is. I'm not going to pretend I do. What I know is what it does." She resumed her walk, checking another cell. "It prepares." "Prepares for what?" Glynis stopped at the far end of the corridor, near the open security door, and turned to face me. The darkness behind her was absolute. How much news have you followed the last 2 weeks? The incidents in Maryland, the hospital quarantine in Virginia, the thing they keep calling a novel pathogen that they can't isolate in any lab. I'd followed it loosely. A cluster of violent incidents in the Chesapeake region, unusual aggression, bite transmission, rapid neurological deterioration. Social media was full of zombie jokes. The CDC had issued a statement calling it a localized outbreak of undetermined etiology and asking the public not to speculate. I hadn't paid much attention. I'd been busy driving to the prison to lock myself in a cell because I'd killed a woman on Route 2 and couldn't figure out how else to carry it. "That's what the sirens are about?" I said. "I think so. I think it reached here faster than anyone predicted, or it was always here and they're just now noticing. Either way." She gestured at the building around us. "These walls are 3 feet of limestone and concrete. The windows are 30 feet up. The doors are steel. This building was designed to keep dangerous things contained. It works in both directions." The padlock gave. The shackle parted with a dull snap, and the lock fell to the catwalk, grating with a clang that echoed through the block like a gunshot. I pulled the cell door open. It resisted, grinding on corroded hinges, then swung wide. I stepped out onto the catwalk. Free. The air tasted different outside the cell, which made no sense. It was the same air, the same corridor, but my lungs read it as different, less compressed. I stood still for a moment, breathing, feeling the absence of bars on either side of me. "The south wall breach," I said. "I can be out into my truck in 5 minutes." "You can," Glynis said. "And then you'll be in an open vehicle on an open road with whatever's happening out there between you and anywhere you want to go. No weapons, no information, no plan. I have a truck, I have gas, I can drive." "Drive where?" "Listen." I listened. The sirens were still going. But underneath them, beneath the mechanical wailing, there was something else now. A sound I hadn't noticed because the sirens masked it. Distant, irregular, percussive, like fireworks. Except it wasn't July, and it wasn't celebration. It was gunfire. Scattered, coming from the direction of Moundsville, and it wasn't stopping. "That started 15 minutes ago," Glynis said. "It's gotten closer since." I stood on the catwalk, hacksaw blade still in my hand, and felt the morning rearrange itself around me. I'd planned 12 hours of confinement. I'd planned a neat, private act of penance. Sit in a cell, feel the weight, leave at noon, drive home, carry the experience like a stone in my pocket for the rest of my life. Instead, the world outside had broken while I was inside, and the woman below me was telling me the broken world was the more dangerous room. "You said something lives in the sub-basement," I said, "and you're telling me to stay in the building with it." Glynis looked at me for a long time. "I'm telling you, it's been down there for decades, and it hasn't come up. Whatever's out there started today, and it's already shooting distance from where we stand. You do the math. I came down from the upper tier. The stairwell felt different in daylight. Less claustrophobic, more skeletal. Rust on the railings came off on my palms in brown streaks. At the bottom, I stood in the lower corridor, 5 feet from Glynis, and realized she was smaller than she'd looked from above. 5'3", maybe 5'4". Thin wrists. The coverall hung loose on her shoulders. She didn't look like a guardian of anything. She looked like someone who hadn't slept well in a very long time. "How many times have you been down there?" I said. "To the sub-basement." "Twice. The first time was in 2004, about a year after I started coming back. I went down because I needed to understand what I was checking on. The stairs go down 2 flights. The lower level is partially flooded, ankle deep in most places, knee deep in some. There are 18 solitary cells arranged in a radial pattern around a central observation room. The cells are open. The observation room is intact. What's in it? Something that breathes. She said it flatly. Something that occupies space without filling it. The room feels crowded when you step in, but there's nothing to see. The air is warm, the walls are damp, and you feel, I don't know how to say this without sounding like the ghost tour version of myself. You feel expected, like you're arriving for an appointment you didn't schedule. And the second time, 2019, I went down because the breathing had changed. Faster, agitated. I thought something had disturbed it. Construction nearby, a water table shift, I don't know. I went down, and the observation room was different. Warmer. The water level had dropped. And the walls... She paused, choosing words. The walls had marks on them. Not scratches, not writing, patterns. Organic looking, like the growth rings of a tree, but pressed into concrete. They hadn't been there before. You're telling me something is growing down there. I'm telling you something is changing down there. And it's been changing on a schedule that seems to align with what's happening outside right now. I don't think that's coincidence. I think this building is part of something. And I think the thing in the sub-basement knew this was coming before anyone on the surface did. The gunfire outside was closer, not continuous. Bursts, pauses, single shots. The pattern of people engaging targets, not the sustained fire of a military operation. This was defensive, reactive. People shooting at things that were coming toward them. We need to seal the south wall breach, Glynis said. If you're staying. I haven't decided I'm staying. I know. But if we wait to seal it until after you decide, it might be too late. The breach is wide enough for a person. It'll be wide enough for whatever those people are shooting at. She was right, and I knew it. And the fact that I knew it meant I'd already decided. I just hadn't admitted it yet. We moved through the prison together, out of cell block 4. Through the main junction, past the abandoned intake processing area, with its shattered plexiglass partitions and overturned furniture, toward the south wing. The building was vast. I'd only seen the path from the wall breach to cell block 4, a straight line through dark corridors. Now, in daylight, the scale of it pressed in. High ceilings, long sight lines. Rooms branching off corridors that terminated in locked doors or collapsed ceilings. A city in miniature, built for containment. The south wall breach was in what had been the laundry facility, and a large open room with industrial drains in the floor and anchor bolts where machines had been removed. The exterior wall had a section roughly 4 feet wide where the limestone had crumbled and the rebar had rusted through, leaving an opening just above ground level. Daylight poured through it. Outside, I could see grass. The perimeter fence collapsed in this section, and beyond it, the road. On the road, a car was burning. It was maybe 300 yards away, fully engulfed, black smoke pillaring into the morning sky. No one was near it. No emergency response. Just a car burning on the road in the middle of a clear April morning. "Help me with this," Glynis said. She was already dragging a steel shelving unit from the wall toward the breach. I grabbed the other end. We muscled it into the opening. It didn't fill it completely, but it narrowed the gap to less than a foot. We stacked debris against it. Broken concrete, old pipe sections, a filing cabinet she'd clearly positioned near the breach for this purpose on a previous visit. "You planned for this," I said. "I staged materials, yes, over the years. I didn't know when. I didn't know what exactly. But the thing downstairs has been getting ready for something, and I figured I should too. We stood there, breathing hard from the effort, looking at our improvised barricade. Through the remaining gap, I could see the burning car, and near it now, moving along the road with a gait that was wrong, a stumbling lurch that covered ground faster than it looked like it should. A figure, then another, then four more, emerging from the tree line on the far side of the road. They weren't running, they were migrating, moving with that terrible, purposeful drift, heads low, arms loose. Even at 300 yards, I could see that their movement was not the movement of people choosing to walk somewhere. It was the movement of bodies being operated by something that hadn't fully learned the controls. I stepped back from the breach. "Noon," I said to Glynis, meaning this was supposed to end at noon. This was supposed to be 12 hours, and then I'd go home. She didn't answer. She was already walking back toward the main junction, and I followed her, because the building was suddenly the only geometry that made sense. Glynis knew the prison the way I knew the highway system around Wheeling, not from maps, but from mileage. She moved through corridors without hesitation, opened doors I would have assumed were sealed, avoided sections she said were structurally compromised, without checking. In the first hour after we barricaded the south breach, she walked me through the defensible perimeter, which doors were steel and which were wood, which windows were too high to reach from outside, which sections of wall had deteriorated enough to worry about. The prison was, in her assessment, almost entirely sound. 3 feet of limestone backed by concrete. The main entrance, a vehicle sally port on the north side, had double steel gates, both closed, both rusted into their tracks. The east wing had intact windows on the ground floor, unusual for an abandoned building, because they'd been fitted with security glass that hadn't been worth salvaging. The west wing had the most damage, a partial roof collapse in what had been the chapel. But the exterior walls were solid, and the collapse had created an impassable interior blockage that actually helped. It was a wall we didn't have to build. This place held 1,200 men at peak capacity, Glynis said as we checked the North Gatehouse. Riots, escape attempts, a fire in '79 that burned for 16 hours. The building survived all of it. It'll survive today. Through the gatehouse windows, I could see the access road leading to Route 2. 3 more cars had stopped. Not burning, just stopped. Doors open, no occupants visible. A dog ran across the road and disappeared into brush. The sirens had stopped at some point in the last hour. I hadn't noticed when. The gunfire was sporadic now, more distant, as if the shooters had moved away or stopped shooting. "We need water," I said. "I have 3 bottles left. That's maybe a day for 2 people." The prison has a well system, hand pump, gravity-fed, installed in the 1890s. The electric pumps replaced it in the 50s, but the manual infrastructure was never removed. "There's a hand pump in the basement of the North Wing kitchen. I tested it last year. Rusty for the first dozen strokes, then clear. You tested the water supply." "I told you, I've been preparing." I looked at her. This small, tired woman in a maintenance coverall who had spent years coming back to a decommissioned prison to check on something she couldn't identify. Staging barricade materials, testing water pumps, walking routes. The dedication of it was either admirable or insane, and in the current circumstances, the distinction didn't matter. "What about the thing in the sub-basement?" I said. "You keep talking about the building as a fortress, but the threat isn't just outside." Glynis leaned against the gatehouse wall and crossed her arms. "In 23 years of coming here, it has never come above the sub-basement level. Not once. I've checked for signs every visit. Footprints, moisture trails, disturbance. Nothing. Whatever it is, it stays where it is. Until it doesn't. Until it doesn't. Yes, That's the calculation. A known quantity below us that has never moved versus an unknown and clearly hostile situation outside that is actively moving toward us. I'm not telling you there's a good choice. I'm telling you there's a math problem, and the numbers favor staying. She was right about the math. I hated that she was right about the math. We found the kitchen. The hand pump was exactly where she'd said it would be. A cast iron fixture bolted to the floor next to a massive porcelain sink that had cracked down the middle. I worked the handle. 12 strokes of rust-red water. Then it ran clear. Cold. I tasted it cautiously. Iron, mineral, the deep earth flavor of groundwater that had never seen sunlight. Drinkable. I filled my empty bottles and drank one straight from the pump. The cold of it hit my stomach and radiated outward. And for a few seconds, I felt like a functioning person instead of a man trapped between a monster below and a collapsing world above. "We should check the rest of the building," Glynis said. "Every entry point, every gap. Daylight makes it easier." And after that? After that, we wait. And we listen. And if the sub-basement changes, we deal with it. She said deal with it the way someone says cross that bridge. And I understood that for all her preparation, she had no plan for the thing downstairs. She'd been its custodian for 2 decades, not its adversary. She'd checked on it the way you check on a sleeping bear in a cave, confirming its location, its state, its boundaries. She'd never had to consider what to do if it woke up. Neither had I. But the breathing I'd heard all night was not the sound of something sleeping. It was the sound of something waiting. And the difference between sleeping and waiting is this. Sleeping things wake on their own schedule. Waiting things wake when the thing they're waiting for arrives. At 9:30, 2 people appeared at the north gate. Glynis saw them first. We were in the old administration wing, checking window integrity, when she stopped and cocked her head toward the gatehouse. I heard it a moment later. Voices, not the muffled conversational tone I'd heard through the security door. These voices were raw, high, broken by exertion and fear. We ran to the gatehouse. Through the window, 2 figures were pressed against the outer gate, pulling at the rusted steel, screaming for someone to open it. A man and a teenage girl. He was maybe 40, heavy, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt dark with sweat. She was 15, 16, thin, dark hair pulled back, bleeding from a cut on her forearm that she held pressed against her body. Behind them, on the access road, 3 figures moved in that wrong gate lurch I'd seen from the south side. They were 200 yards out and closing. "Open the gate," the man screamed. He'd seen us through the window. "Please, God, open the gate." Glynis was already moving. The inner gate had a manual release, a lever mechanism, counterweighted, that she clearly knew about. She hauled on it with both hands. Nothing. Rusted. I joined her. We pulled together. Metal shrieked. The lever moved 6 inches, then 12, and the inner gate began to slide along its track with a sound like tearing sheet metal. "The outer gate has the same mechanism," Glynis said, breathing hard. "On the other side. They'll have to work it from the outside while we hold this one." I squeezed through the widening gap in the inner gate and crossed the vehicle bay to the outer gate. Through the bars, the man's face was slick with sweat and terror. "There's a lever," I said. "Right side at waist height. Pull it toward you." He found it, pulled. It moved easier than ours, exposed to rain. The rust was different, more superficial. The outer gate cracked open 6 inches. The girl slid through instantly, sideways, gasping. The man forced himself through a moment later, ripping his shirt on an exposed bolt. "Close it," Glynis called. I was already pushing. The man helped. We forced the outer gate back, and the lever seated itself with a clunk that meant the lock had re-engaged. Through the bars, the three figures on the road had halved the distance. I could see them clearly now. They were people. They had been people. The lead figure was a woman in a nightgown, barefoot, her feet leaving dark prints on the asphalt that I understood were blood from walking on pavement without shoes. Her jaw was wrong. Not broken, but extended, hanging open at an angle that suggested the muscles controlling it were no longer receiving the right signals. Her eyes tracked us. Her pace didn't change. She reached the gate, pressed against it, and stood there. No attempt to climb, no attempt to force, just pressure. A body leaning into a barrier with the patience of water finding a crack. The other two joined her. Same behavior, same patience. They stood at the gate and leaned. We retreated to the inner gate and sealed it. In the vehicle bay, the man sat on the concrete floor with his back against the wall and his head between his knees. The girl stood apart from him, holding her wounded arm, looking at Glynis and me with an expression that was not fear, but a kind of furious calculation. She was assessing us, deciding what we were. "I'm Marcus Previtt," the man said without looking up. "This is my daughter Jenna. We were in Moundsville. We were in our house. They came through the windows." Jenna said, "It started at a gas station on Route 2. A man attacked someone at the pumps, then more. Then it was everywhere. We drove, but the road was blocked, and we ran. And we saw the prison, and we came here because the walls." She stopped. She was trembling, but her voice was controlled. She looked at her arm. "I cut it on the fence coming in. Nothing bit me. I want you to know that. Nothing bit me." The specificity of that denial told me she understood the rules already. Bite means transmission. Transmission means you're finished. She was 16, and she was already presenting evidence of her own innocence to strangers. She needed to trust her. "We have water," I said. "We have walls. The building is secure." Glynis was looking at Jenna's arm. Then she looked at me, and in her expression, I saw a question she didn't ask aloud. "Are we sure about her?" The cut was ragged, consistent with metal, not teeth. There was no saliva, no bruising, no sign of the kind of wound a mouth makes. But certainty was a luxury. And Glynis was a woman who'd spent 23 years monitoring something she couldn't explain. She knew how little certainty was worth. "Let me clean that," Glynis said, and led Jenna toward the kitchen. Marcus stayed on the floor. I stayed with him. Through the gatehouse window, the three figures stood at the outer gate, leaning, waiting. The same patience I'd heard in the breathing. By 11, there were 9 of them at the north gate. I stopped counting after that because counting implied that the number mattered, and the number didn't matter. What mattered was the structure. 3 feet of limestone, steel gates, high windows, and the distance between us and them. Marcus had recovered enough to walk and talk in complete sentences, though his hands shook when he wasn't gripping something. He'd been a plumber in Moundsville. Self-employed, 10 years. He and Jenna lived alone. Her mother had left when Jenna was small, a fact he volunteered without being asked, as if establishing that he was the only responsible party. He was practical, frightened, and desperate to be useful. He asked 3 times in the first hour what he could do, what needed to be fixed, what needed to be carried. I gave him tasks, filling water containers, moving debris, checking windows. The work calmed him the way it calms most people, and not the accomplishment, but the direction, having a next thing. Jenna was different. Glynis had cleaned and bandaged her arm with strips torn from a bedsheet we'd found in the old infirmary, one of the few rooms that still contained usable supplies. Jenna sat still for the treatment, asked no questions, said thank you exactly once, and then began moving through the building on her own. Not exploring, inventorying. I found her in the kitchen 20 minutes later, standing at the hand pump, working the handle with a systematic rhythm, filling every container she could find. "We don't know how long," she said when she saw me watching. "So we fill everything now." She was 16. She was thinking in supply chains while her father was thinking in tasks. The difference was temperamental, not generational. Marcus worked to stay sane. Jenna worked to stay alive. Both valid. But I knew already which one I'd trust in a crisis that lasted longer than a day. At 11:15, the floor vibrated. Not an earthquake, not structural settling. A single low-frequency pulse that came up through the concrete and into the soles of my feet and stopped. I was in the main corridor between cell block 4 and the administrative wing. Marcus was 10 feet behind me, carrying a bucket of water. He felt it too. I saw him stop, shift his weight, look down. "What was that?" he said. I didn't answer because I didn't know. And then I did know, because it happened again. Same pulse, same duration, same direction. From below, from the sub-basement. Glynis appeared at the end of the corridor. She'd been in the east wing, checking windows. Her face was still, but her hands were fists at her sides. "It's never done that before," she said. "Done what?" Marcus said. "What is that?" "Something under the building," I said. There was no point in concealment. We were 4 people in a sealed structure. Secrets would cost more than truth. Glynis has been monitoring it for years. Something lives in the sub-basement level. Marcus set the bucket down slowly. "Something like what?" "We don't know," Glynis said. "It's been dormant, contained. It stays below the first floor." "It has stayed below the first floor," I corrected. Past tense. The siren started, and now it's pulsing. Jenna had appeared behind her father. She'd heard everything. Her face showed no surprise. At 16, in the middle of an apocalypse, discovering that the building you've taken shelter in contains an unknown subterranean entity probably registers as just the next item on a growing list of things that can kill you. "Can we seal the access?" she said. Practical, immediate. No wasted motion on disbelief. "The security door between cell block 4 and the solitary wing," Glynis said. "It's the only access point to the sub-basement stairs. It's steel, solid frame. If we can bolt it." The third pulse hit. Longer this time. 4 seconds, maybe 5. It wasn't vibration, I realized. It was pressure. A compression wave moving through the substrate of the building, the way a heartbeat moves through a body. The prison wasn't shaking. The prison was being pushed from below. The entire lower structure flexing by a millimeter and releasing, flexing and releasing. Like breathing. The thing in the sub-basement wasn't pulsing. It was breathing harder. We moved to the security door. It was still open, exactly as it had been when Glynis walked through it that morning. The corridor beyond was dark. The air coming through it was warm, warmer than the rest of the building by a noticeable margin. And it smelled different. Not decay, not earth. Something organic and close, like the air inside a greenhouse, humid, saturated, alive. "Close it," Marcus said. He was already gripping the door's edge. We closed it. The door was heavy. 300 pounds, maybe more, but it swung on its hinges with the same eerie smoothness Glynis had described. It seated into its frame with a boom that traveled through the block. There was no lock, The original locking mechanism was electronic, long dead. The door could be held shut by its own weight and the friction of its hinges, but anything with sustained force could push it open. "We need to brace it," Jenna said. We spent the next 30 minutes building a barricade against the inside of the security door. Steel bed frames dragged from cells, pipe sections, the filing cabinet from the south wing breach. Glynis said we could afford to thin that barricade now because the figures at the north gate showed no interest in circling the building. They stayed at the gate. They leaned. They waited. When we finished, the barricade was 3 feet deep and wedged against the corridor walls on both sides. It wouldn't stop a determined force, but it would slow one. It would give us time. Time for what? I didn't know. But time was the only currency we had. Noon came and went. My 12 hours expired while I was dragging a section of iron railing to reinforce the security door barricade. I didn't notice until later, when I glanced at the angle of light through the clear-story windows and calculated the sun's position. Noon. The time I was supposed to hacksaw through the padlock, walk out, climb through the south wall breach, get in my truck, and drive home. Home. The apartment in Wheeling. The court date in June. The empty parking space where Patricia Sims's Tahoe would never be again. All of it still existed, or had existed 12 hours ago, when the world was still the kind of place where a man could punish himself with a night in an abandoned cell and call it accountability. I sat on the floor of cell block 4 and ate my second protein bar, the last one, and tried to feel something about the collapse of the old world. I couldn't. The gap between before and after was too wide to bridge emotionally while I was still inside it. It was like trying to mourn a house fire while the fire is still burning. The grief would come later, if there was a later. Right now, there was only the building and the people in it, and the things pressing against it from above and below. Marcus sat across the corridor from me. Jenna and Glynis were in the kitchen, running the hand pump, filling the last containers they'd scavenged, an old mop bucket, 2 plastic bins from the infirmary, a garbage can lined with a plastic bag. We had maybe 15 gallons, enough for 4 people for 3 or 4 days if we were careful. "You came here to punish yourself," Marcus said. Not a question. He'd put pieces together, the padlock, the cell, the sleeping bag. He was watching me with an expression that was careful, not judgmental. A man reading another man's situation and deciding how much to say about it. Something like that. For something you did. For someone I killed. A car accident. My fault. He absorbed that, nodded slowly. And you locked yourself in a cell. I wanted to know what it felt like. Confinement, consequence. The thing I'd earned, but hadn't received yet. You know what it feels like now. I looked around. The prison, the barricade, the things at the gate, the thing below us. 4 people in a sealed building with limited water and no idea what came next. "Yeah," I said. "It feels like this." Marcus almost smiled. It was the first expression I'd seen on his face that wasn't fear or effort. "My daughter thinks we should explore the East Wing. She says there might be supplies in the old commissary. I told her to wait for everyone." "She's right. We should check it." "She's right about most things. She's been right about most things since she was 11. I just carry the heavy stuff." He stood up and extended a hand. I took it. He pulled me to my feet. His grip was solid, a plumber's grip. And for a second, we stood there. 2 men holding hands in a prison corridor. And the absurdity of it was the most human thing I'd felt in weeks. We gathered in the main junction. Glynis led us east. The commissary had been partially looted over the decades. Anything portable and valuable was long gone, but the bones remained. Steel shelving, storage lockers, a walk-in cooler with a door that's still sealed. Inside the cooler, untouched because looters hadn't bothered forcing the latch, cases of institutional toilet paper, a box of emergency candles, 3 sealed 5-gallon buckets of powdered cleaning solution that was useless, and 1 sealed 5-gallon bucket of institutional peanut butter with a sell-by date of March 2002. Jenna picked up the peanut butter bucket and looked at me. 24-year-old peanut butter. Peanut butter doesn't really go bad, Glynis said. The oil separates. It tastes terrible, but it won't hurt you. Jenna tucked the bucket under her arm. Then we eat terrible. We also found, in a maintenance closet off the commissary, a crate of road flares. Expired. But road flares don't meaningfully expire. The chemical compound remains viable for decades. 24 flares, and a fire axe mounted on the wall behind a glass panel that had already been broken. The axe was surface rusted, but solid. I took it. The weight of it in my hands changed something. Not the situation, but my relationship to the situation. A tool I could use. A choice I could make that wasn't just waiting. At 2 p.m., the sub-basement pulsed again. Stronger. The pulse traveled up through the walls this time, not just the floor. I felt it in my palms, where they rested against the corridor stone. Jenna felt it. Marcus felt it. Glynis closed her eyes. "It's escalating," she said. "Whatever it's been waiting for. It's closer now." Through the clear story windows, the sky outside was still blue. A beautiful spring afternoon in West Virginia. Birds still sang in the trees beyond the perimeter fence. Inside the prison, the air was warmer than it should have been, and getting warmer. And the warmth was rising from below. The first real test of the barricade came at 4:30. We heard it before we felt it. A deep structural groan from the direction of cell block 4, where the security door separated us from the solitary wing and the sub-basement access. Then pressure. The barricade we'd built shifted 2 inches toward us as something pushed the door from the other side. The bed frames scraped on concrete. The filing cabinet tilted. One pipe section rolled free and clanged across the floor. We were all there in 30 seconds. Marcus and I braced against the barricade with our shoulders. Glynis wedged herself beside us. Jenna positioned pipe sections as chocks, kicking them into place with precision. The pressure held for maybe 15 seconds. Constant, not impact. Not something hitting the door. Pressure, steady and distributed, as if the air itself on the other side had become denser and was expanding against the barrier. Then it stopped. The barricade settled. The door was still closed. Through the crack between the door and the frame, warm air seeped in, that greenhouse air, wet and close and alive. And with it, a sound. Not breathing, not footsteps. A sound I can only describe as settling. The sound a house makes at night, multiplied 1,000 times. The sound of a large structure shifting its weight. "It's in the solitary wing," Glynis said. She was pale. "It's above the sub-basement for the first time." "You said it never came up." "It never did. In 23 years, it never did." "What changed?" Jenna asked. She was the only one who sounded calm, though calm might have been the wrong word. She sounded focused, the way someone sounds when they've moved past the question of whether they're in danger and arrived at the question of what to do about it. "The outbreak," Glynis said. "The people at the gate. Whatever's happening outside. It woke this up, or this woke that up. Or they're the same thing on different time scales." I thought about the breathing I'd heard the night before. Slow, patient. And the pattern of the pulses, increasing in frequency and intensity as the day progressed. As the siren sounded, as the infected gathered, as if the thing below was synchronized with the collapse above. Two hands of the same clock. "We need a second fallback position," I said. "If the barricade fails, where do we go?" "The North Gatehouse," Glynis said. "It has its own exterior walls, steel interior door, line of sight to the vehicle bay. It's defensible." "The North Gate has 9 infected leaning against it," Marcus said. "The gate is exterior. The gatehouse is interior. They can't reach us in the gatehouse without breaching a steel gate that's held since 1876. "But we'd be trapped between them and it," I said. "Infected to the north, the sub-basement thing spreading from the south." "We're already trapped," Jenna said. "Choosing where we're trapped is the only freedom we have." 16. She was 16. We staged supplies in the North Gatehouse: water, the peanut butter, the candles and flares, the fire axe. We made 2 trips, working quickly, listening for another push against the security door. It didn't come. But the temperature in the cell block 4 corridor had risen noticeably. Not uncomfortable yet, but present. 75 degrees in a building that should have been in the low 60s. The warmth was directional. It came from behind the security door, radiating through the stone like the wall itself was developing a fever. At 6 p.m., the light began to shift. Golden hour in a prison is disorienting. The light enters at acute angles and paints the walls in colors that were never intended. Amber, copper, a deep rose that makes the limestone look like flesh. We gathered in the gatehouse. Marcus opened the peanut butter. Glynis was right. The oil had separated completely, and the solid mass beneath was dense and crumbling and tasted like the memory of peanut butter rather than the thing itself. We ate it with our fingers, passing the bucket, not talking. Through the gatehouse window, the infected at the north gate had grown to a crowd. 20, maybe 25. All standing, all leaning. None attempting to climb or force. Just pressure. That endless, passive, hydraulic patience. And then one of them did something different. The one nearest the gate. The woman in the nightgown. The first one. The one who'd been there since morning. Turned away from the gate and looked south. Toward the building. Not at the building. Through it. As if she could see something behind the walls, inside the stone, beneath the floors. She opened her mouth. Not the broken jaw gape I'd seen before. She opened it the way a person opens their mouth to speak. And a sound came out that was not a moan, not a scream, not anything in the infected vocabulary I'd been building all day. It was a breath. A long, slow exhalation. 4 seconds in duration, identical in rhythm and character to the breathing I'd heard from beneath my cell the night before. The others followed. One by one, the crowd at the gate turned south and breathed. The same pattern, the same rhythm. 25 bodies, breathing in unison, facing the building, facing what was inside it. Below us, the sub-basement answered. A pulse so strong the water in our containers rippled. They were talking to each other. The conversation, I don't know what else to call it, lasted 40 minutes. The infected at the gate breathed in their synchronized rhythm. The sub-basement pulsed in response. Back and forth, call and answer. The building is medium. We sat in the gatehouse and listened to something communicate through us, around us, using the prison as a resonating chamber for a language that had no words. Jenna pressed her hand flat against the gatehouse wall. "The wall is vibrating," she said, "not just during the pulses. Constantly now. Feel it." I put my palm on the stone. She was right. A continuous low-frequency tremor, barely perceptible, like pressing your hand against the hood of an idling engine. The building was conducting the exchange, transmitting it through its own structure. 3 feet of limestone and concrete, built in 1876 to contain violence, now serving as a membrane between two forms of the same thing. Glynis stood at the window, watching the infected. Her face was unreadable. "I was wrong," she said. And her voice was quiet enough that Marcus, sitting against the far wall, didn't hear. She was talking to me. I thought it was contained. I thought the building was the container. But it's not. The building is the instrument. It was never a cage. It was a bell. What does that mean for us? It means when the bell rings loud enough, the door won't matter. The barricade won't matter. It's not going to break through the door. It's going to saturate the building, come through the walls themselves. At 7:10, the breathing stopped. The infected at the gate fell silent. The sub-basement went still. The tremor in the walls ceased. The silence was absolute. No sirens, no gunfire, no wind, no birds. The kind of silence that precedes a weather event, as if the atmosphere itself is holding its breath. Then the temperature dropped. Not gradually. In a span of perhaps 2 minutes, the gatehouse air went from uncomfortably warm to cold. Not prison cold, deep cold, the kind that lives in stone that never sees sunlight. The walls, which had been radiating warmth for hours, turned to ice under my palms. Our breath fogged. "It pulled back," Glynis said. She sounded surprised, almost disbelieving. "It pulled back down." She was right. The warmth, the vibration, the pressure, all of it receded like a tide going out. The building felt like a building again. Stone and silence and the smell of old concrete. But the infected at the gate didn't leave. They stood. They waited. They breathed normally now. Individual rhythms, no synchronization. Just bodies at a gate, in the dark, watching the building with eyes that might or might not have still been their own. "Why did it stop?" Marcus asked. Glynis didn't answer. She was standing very still, her head tilted, listening to something below the threshold of my hearing. Then she looked at me. "It didn't stop," she said. "It finished." "Finished what?" "Whatever it was becoming. The breathing, the pulses, the communication with the infected. It wasn't building to an attack. It was building to a completion, like a chrysalis. And it's done now." The security door at the far end of cell block 4, the one we'd barricaded, opened. We heard it from the gatehouse. Not a crash, not a forced breach. The barricade moved. Bed frames screeched on concrete. The filing cabinet fell. And the door swung open with the same smooth authority it had shown that morning, pushing everything we'd placed against it aside, like a man brushing cobwebs from a doorway. Then, footsteps. Slow, measured. One set coming through cell block 4, coming toward us. We pulled back to the inner wall of the gatehouse. Marcus put himself between Jenna and the corridor. Glynis positioned herself by the door. I held the fire axe. The footsteps crossed the main junction. They were clear, deliberate, spaced evenly. The walk of someone with no urgency and no constraint. They entered the corridor leading to the north wing. They stopped. Silence. Then a voice. The same voice I'd heard through the security door that morning. The woman's voice. Conversational. Intimate. But it wasn't coming from behind the door anymore. It was in the corridor, 20 feet away. Glynis. My name, then hers. Both of our names, spoken in sequence, calmly, the way a host greets dinner guests who've arrived on time. Glynis's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs to stop them. 23 years, she whispered to me. It never said my name. It never spoke. "Don't answer," Marcus said from behind us. His voice was tight. The voice in the corridor spoke again. "The door is open. You can leave through the south wing. The wall breach is clear. Your truck is where you left it." This was addressed to me. It knew about my truck. "What are you?" I said. I didn't plan to speak. The words came out the way reflex moves an arm, without consultation. A pause. Then, "I'm what was here before the building. I'm what the building was placed on top of. I'm not what's happening outside. But I am what comes after it." "After what?" Glynis said. "After the outbreak burns through. After the infected stop being useful. The pathogen outside is the sowing. I am the harvest." The temperature in the corridor was neutral now. Room temperature, comfortable. The footsteps resumed. Not toward us, but laterally, moving through the building at a perpendicular angle. Receding. Whatever had come up from the sub-basement was not advancing on us. It was walking the prison the way Glynis walked the prison. Checking doors, checking walls, taking ownership. "It's claiming the building," Glynis said. "The door is open," I said. "It told us we can leave." "Because it wants us to leave," Jenna said from behind her father. "The infected outside. It called them here. They're at every gate. If we walk out, we walk into them. It said the south wall breach is clear." "And you trust that?" I didn't. But I thought about it differently than trust. The thing had lived beneath this building for longer than any of us had been alive. It had tolerated Glynis's visits for 23 years. It had let me sleep 50 feet above it with nothing but concrete between us. It had pushed a barricade aside and walked past us without violence. It wasn't hunting. It wasn't angry. It was reorganizing. And in its reorganization, we were furniture that needed to be moved. "I don't think it cares whether we live or die," I said. "I think it needs the building empty for whatever comes next. And it's giving us a window." "Or it's funneling us into the infected," Jenna said. "Maybe. But staying here means staying inside a building that now belongs to something that just walked through a 300-pound steel door. The walls aren't ours anymore." Marcus spoke. "I came here to protect my daughter. The walls were protection. If the walls aren't ours, then staying isn't protecting. It's waiting." We looked at each other. 4 people in a gatehouse, making a decision that would commit all of us, with incomplete information, under pressure, with consequences that could not be reversed. This is what every survival story comes down to. Not the barricade, not the supplies, not the weapon in your hand. The moment you decide to move or stay, and the reasons are never good enough, and you do it anyway. "South wing," I said. "Together, fast. If the breach is blocked, we come back and reassess." We moved through the corridor in a tight line. Me first with the axe, Glynis second, Marcus and Jenna behind. The building was quiet. The footsteps we'd heard were gone. The air was still and neutral. Cell block 4, when we passed through it, looked different. The security door was fully open, the barricades scattered like toys, and the corridor beyond glowed with a faint warmth that was not firelight and not electrical, but something organic. A bioluminescence that lined the walls in patterns I recognized from Glynis's description. Growth rings, tree rings, the concentric patterns of something alive, pressed into concrete, expanding outward from the stairwell that led down to the sub-basement. We didn't stop. We didn't look down the stairs. We moved through the main junction, into the south wing, past the intake area, into the laundry room. The barricade was gone. Not dismantled. Gone. The shelving unit, the pipe sections, the concrete blocks. The wall breach gaped open, and through it, the April night was cool and clear and empty. No figures in the grass, no movement on the road. The burning car from that morning was a charred shell, its fire long dead. I went through first. The grass was wet with dew. The air smelled like spring. Earth, green things, open sky. I turned back. Glynis came through. Then Marcus. Then Jenna, last turning sideways to fit, the peanut butter bucket still clutched under her arm. We stood in the grass outside the prison, in the dark, breathing. Behind us, through the breach, the interior of the prison pulsed once. A deep, silent compression that I felt not in my feet but in my chest. A heartbeat transmitted through the ground, through the foundation, through the bones of the building, outward. The growth ring patterns on the walls flared and dimmed, settling into a rhythm. The prison was alive. Or the thing inside it was alive, and the prison was its body now. The distinction had stopped mattering. We ran for my truck. The truck was where I'd left it, parked in a pull-off 200 yards south of the perimeter fence, behind a stand of poplars. The keys were in my sleeping bag stuff sack, which I'd grabbed on the way out. The engine turned over on the first try. The gas tank was 3/4 full. We pulled onto Route 2 and headed north. The road was empty, not clear. There were abandoned vehicles every few hundred yards, doors open, engines cold, some with headlights still burning. But no people, no infected. The night was still and moonlit, and the road unwound ahead of us, like a pale ribbon through dark trees. Glynis sat beside me. Marcus and Jenna were in the back seat of the cab. No one spoke for the first 10 minutes. The silence was different from the prison silence. This silence had motion in it, velocity, the hum of tires on asphalt, and the rattle of a truck that needed new shocks. It was the silence of people moving through danger fast enough that speech felt like a tax on attention they couldn't afford. I drove until we reached the Route 2 interchange north of New Martinsville. There was a National Guard checkpoint, the first sign that institutional response still existed. Humvees, floodlights, soldiers in MOPP gear waving vehicles through a single lane. We stopped. A soldier asked us where we'd come from. I said Moundsville. He looked at Jenna's bandaged arm. She said, "I cut it on a fence." He looked at her eyes, her skin, her posture. Whatever he was checking for, he didn't find it. He waved us through. On the other side of the checkpoint, the world was still functioning. Gas stations open, lights on in houses, a diner with a parking lot full of cars and the blue flicker of a television visible through the window. The outbreak had a perimeter, and we were on the other side of it. Marcus took Jenna into the diner. She needed food, water, warmth, and the presence of people who were not running. Glynis and I stayed in the truck. "You're going back," I said. "Not tonight, but yes." "Why?" She looked at me. In the dashboard light, her face was older than it had been that morning. Not tired, changed. The way a face changes when it has processed something the body hasn't caught up with yet. Because someone has to know where it is, what it's becoming, what it said about the harvest. You heard it. The building is its body now. You can't walk in and check on it like before. No, I can't. But I can watch from outside. I can document. I can be the person who remembers that it told us what it was, and we still don't know what that means. I thought about Patricia Sims. I thought about the cell I'd locked myself in, the padlock, the key I'd dropped down the drain. I'd come to the prison to learn what consequence felt like. I'd learned, not the lesson I'd planned, Nothing about penance or guilt or proportional justice. Something else. Something about the difference between choosing to stay and choosing to leave. And how sometimes the bravest thing isn't enduring the cage, but walking out of it into a world that's become more dangerous than the cage ever was. "I'll come with you," I said, "when you go back." "Why?" "Because I owe a debt, and I haven't finished paying it. And watching a building that might end the world feels like a way to be useful that doesn't require me to forgive myself." Glynis looked at me for a long time. Then she reached into her coverall pocket and pulled out a small notebook, spiral-bound, the kind you buy at a gas station. She'd been carrying it all day. She opened it and showed me the first page. A date, April 4th, 2004, and 2 words, "Still breathing." Pages and pages after that. Dates, observations. 23 years of data collected by a woman with no training and no authority, and nothing but a set of keys and the willingness to keep showing up. She closed the notebook and put it away. "We'll need more notebooks," she said. I never went to trial for Patricia Sims. The courts in West Virginia suspended non-essential proceedings within a week of the outbreak. By the time the systems reconstituted enough to process cases, the world had different priorities, and the file was among thousands that quietly lapsed. I don't take that as absolution. I carry Patricia the way I carry everything from before, as weight that doesn't decrease with distance, only becomes more familiar. The night in the cell didn't teach me what consequence feels like. The morning after taught me what it means to choose survival when you're not sure you've earned it. Marcus and Jenna resettled in Parkersburg. He replumbs buildings in a city that needs functioning infrastructure more than it needs anything else. She's 18 now and volunteers at a supply distribution center, and calls me once a week to ask about the prison. I tell her what I know. She writes it down in a notebook of her own. Glynis and I go back every 3 weeks. We don't go inside. We park on the ridge east of the perimeter and watch. The building looks the same from the outside. Limestone, steel, barred windows. But at night, if the air is still, you can feel the pulse from half a mile away. That slow, steady rhythm. 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. Breathing, growing, becoming whatever it told us it would become. The harvest hasn't come yet. We keep our notebooks, we mark the dates, we watch the bell, and we wait for it to ring.